we will talk about economic liberalism and praxis. How to put in practice liberalism, focus on Latin America, where I come from. What is praxis? Praxis is the process of using a theory or something that you have learned in a practical way. So, let's talk about a tragedy, the century of collectivism. 20th century was considered the century of collectivism. A new liberal era, the act of self-destruction and the best possible satisfaction of human wants. We recently celebrated 30 years of Berlin Wall a few days ago. Since then, the only ones who can destroy liberalism is within liberalism. That's my theory, not outside. And how the expansion of democracy has generated an increase in the welfare of the world population. What happens when there are asymmetries of information, monopolies, natural monopolies, oligopolies, duopolies, pollution in general. The biggest challenges of liberalism practice are how to manage the state interventionism in that cases. But I think it's in a self-regulated liberal environment that can be done. Decentralization of a state as a form of society liberalization, less state and destruction of a big state monopoly of public and good and services, public good and services. Corporatism of our societies, the tribalism in our societies is very linked to our conservative values, especially in Latin America. A tragedy, the century of collectivism. Then in the 20th century, the spirit of individual liberty and the policy of economic freedom have appeared to be on regression. We have socialism, fascism, Nazism, welfare states, and interventionism. That's bring tyranny, poverty, and a loss of sense of hope in all the 20th century. We have, I'm sorry, that's 20th century, communism, fascism, and how the welfare state begins and how the welfare state ends. A tragedy, the century of collectivism. Well, that's what I said. They all brought tyranny, poverty, loss of sense of hope. Every conceivable form of state management has been tried between the Great War, the First World War, and the fall of Berlin Wall, socialism, fascism, Nazism, welfare state, and interventionism. And each has failed, bringing nothing but tyranny, poverty, lost sense of hope. We have all the state interventionist ways, import substitution, economic nationalism, state capitalism, the China model, socialism, etc. But now, with the 21st century, the age of collectivism maybe is finished, and in its place is coming a new liberal era. A few days ago, we celebrated 30 years of the fall of Berlin Wall, and it's coming a new liberal era with a new information technology revolution. We have citizens best informed and conscious of their democratic and liberal values. In the case of Bolivia, we were talking about 20 days of riots, of pacific resistance, with people, young people, conscious of their values and asking for respect of their democratic decisions. Classical liberalism is a political philosophy which has emphasized that civil liberties and economic freedom are inseparable, both requiring respect for private property in a competitive free market environment. So it's important to realize that we are talking about not only economic freedom, but also civil liberties, political, social liberties. We have the case of Singapore, that is ranked #2 country in the world with economic freedom by Heritage Foundation, but is ranked the 150 country in press, free press and political and civil liberties. So a new liberal era, the act of self-destruction and the best possible satisfaction of human wants. Liberalism and capitalism created foundations on which are based all the prodigious characteristics of our modern way of life. The modern civilization will not cease unless it does so by its own act of self-destruction. No external enemy can destroy it, for no one on earth can match his strength against the messengers of modern civilization. Only inner enemies can threaten it. So it can come to an end only if the ideas of liberalism are supplanted by an anti-liberal ideology, hostile to social cooperation. Liberalism is a free social cooperation that is not the same of a state cooperation. That's the difference. So there has come to be an increasing understanding that material progress is possible only in a liberal capitalist society, even if this point is not expressly conceded by the anti-liberal. It's fully acknowledged and directly in the panegyrics extolling the idea of stability and a state of rest. That's the graphics. The world as 100 people over the last 2 centuries. We have here the increasing democracy and decreasing extreme poverty, increasing basic education, increasing vaccination, literacy, and decreasing child mortality with a more democratic world. This is the evidence about our prodigious characteristic of our modern way of life. Last 200 years, better democracy, better welfare of people. Source are worrying that. So the material advances of recent generations have, of course, been really very agreeable and beneficial. Now, however, it's time to call a halt. The frantic hustle and bustle of modern capitalism must make way for quiet contemplation. One must acquire time for self-communion, and so another economic system must take the place of capitalism, one that is not always restlessly chasing after novelties and innovations. So there is in men, insofar as his thinking being an inherent desire for the improvement of his material conditions. The impulse cannot be eradicated. It's the motive power of all human action. So we were talking about the self-destruction of capitalism. If it happens, it comes from inside the liberalism, like the case of the last riots in Chile and even in the United States. Chile is a liberal economy, liberal society. So the liberalism to diminish suffering, to increase happiness, that is its aim. It has no party flower and no party color, no party song and no party idols, no signboards and no slogans. It has the substance and the arguments. This must lead it to victory. Only capitalism and liberalism, only private property and the unhampered activity of entrepreneurs can guarantee the highest productivity of human labor. So, but what happens when there are asymmetries of information, monopolies, natural monopolies, oligopolies, duopolies, collusion? Ludwig von Mises said, the issue is always the same, the government or the market. There is no third solution. Undoubtedly, the market is the best that allocates resources in a conditions where there is a certain level of competition. But what happens when there are asymmetries of information, monopolies, natural monopolies, oligopolies, duopolies, collusion in general? So that's why the liberal tradition in Latin America is so limited, because of these asymmetries and inequalities. But the solution came from the inside of liberalism. That's the case of the regulation of the state in monopolies, like in the United States, where government forced windows to comply with this law and to compete. Many operating systems emerged, which mean increasing its consumption due to lower prices, not only with benefits for US society, but worldwide. So the market has been perfection thanks to the eruption of freedom. No? I'm not sure of the positive relationship between freedom and market improvement, because, for example, the monopoly, that is an imperfect market, in order to perfect itself, requires intervention of regulation of the state. This only can happen in a free society. While the state must produce public goods that do not compete with private ones, such as public health and education, for example, the big question we must ask ourselves as a society is, how do we define the optimal quantity to produce these goods? Let's say, for example, that all children and young people of school age go to school and have preventive health nearby their home or school. If the market cannot offer it, the state must do it. This should occur mainly in goods and services that impact in human development and improve people's performance or the profitability of human capital, as they also increase the country's production. Let's talk about decentralization as a form of society liberalization. A decentralization of the state distributes the power of the state and create a competitive market of public goods and services, diminishing the power of the state and making a more free society. In 2013, I published a book about the decentralization process in Bolivia, when the state was increasing its power in this time, with intentions of going to socialism, the Evo Morales government. The right of self-determination is regulated by the constitution of Bolivia and a lot of countries. It's unjust for a province to give itself the right of self-determination, thereby foregoing the rights given to all citizens. And the last issue is about corporatism of our societies and tribalism. How do we advance in terms of freedom as a contradiction to tribalism? Measuring the level of corporatism of our societies. The level of corporatism of our society should be measured to know how we advance in terms of freedom as a contradiction to tribalism. I think, this is a quote, I think I have achieved something that I aimed for at a young age, which was to be a citizen of the world. The truth is, I feel at home in France, in England, and in Spain. Wherever I am, as long as I can write, I feel at home. Mario Vargas Llosa.
Questions, please. Or commentaries, short commentaries.
So I wanted to hear your opinion about the future of Bolivia now, and how, and if there is going to be a future with liberalism.
Well, yesterday was one of the best days of Bolivia's democratic history. 20 days, young people on the streets claiming for the respect of their the right to elect their governance. So this is a process that has happened in the last 10 years. The urbanization process in Bolivia. 30 years ago, the 75–80% of population live in rural areas, and that situation changed. Now the 75% of the people, young people, we are in a demographic bonus in Bolivia. Young people is living in cities. The population is living 75% in cities. So this urbanization process create a democratic, a liberal market. We are all the same in the market. We have the same rights, the same citizen rights, and that's what helped to being on the street claiming for democracy in the last 20 days. So I very hopefully with the democratic and liberal future in Bolivia.
Okay, and the second question, please.
Hi, Mark. What do you think about the future in the region? Because one of the most important members of Latin America, like Argentina, elected was another direction the last October with the Fernandez election. What do you think about the position of Argentina?
I think the Fernandez election, I lived 3 years in Argentina. I think the Fernandez election is not the same as the Kirchner or wife, the Mrs. Kirchner election. Alberto Fernandez was the last time of Néstor Kirchner presidency, a critical post chief of cabinet of Kirchner. So I think we are advancing in a respect of institutions, even in Argentina, because even if Cristina Fernandez is not in jail as Lula or another country, I think Alberto Fernandez in a democratic election won the election and will be a moderated president compared with Cristina Fernandez, and in certain way he will follow some of the politics of Mauricio Macri.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And the last presentation of this session is given by Mr. Mark Flatglass from Switzerland.